Okay, while we still have some colleagues still joining us, I believe we do have the majority of everybody in now. So I'd just like to start by welcoming everybody who's already joined us. And welcome to today's webinar. And today's webinar, which is entitled Guarding the Public Purse, Recognising Criminal Behaviour in Procurement, is being jointly hosted by Scotland Excel and the Competition and Markets Authority. Today's topic seems to be a very, very popular one, as the event quickly sold out and our marketing colleagues have been managing a waiting list for a number of weeks now. Delighted to see colleagues here attending from local government, education, health sector, third sector, and many other parts of the public sector, which I guess is an unfortunate kind of reflection that serious and organised crime can and does affect the entire public sector. So just before we get into our first session, and before I introduce you to today's speakers, I'd like to just cover a few minor points of housekeeping, if I may. The first thing to mention is that today's session is being recorded, and I think it's already been placed in the chat that it's going to be made available on Scotland Excel's Academy for any of you that are not able to, for anybody that wasn't able to make it today, or if you miss any part of today for technical reasons. As you join, your microphones have been muted to avoid creating an echo for the others, and all cameras are off other than those of the speakers and presenters. So once our first presenter today has finished their slides and Q&A, we're going to take a 5-minute break between the sessions. But when we do so, please remain kind of in the session so that we don't have the same kind of wave of people coming in at that point, so we don't experience any issues with that. We're going to allocate time for questions at the end of each session today. And if you have a question during either session, please add this into the chat and state which speaker we'd like to address your question to. These will then be picked up by the support team or myself and asked on your behalf. Alternatively, you are going to be able to wait until the end of the session. You can raise a virtual hand using the hands up facility, and you will, and then the support team will enable your microphone. You will have to take yourself off mute and ask your question to the panel. Please remember to lower your hand once you are finished so that we can manage that as best we can. So today's session is obviously tailored for Scotland's public procurement community to equip you with the most up-to-date knowledge from both organisations, building on our previous webinar back in October 2022. So as I mentioned, today's webinar is comprised of two 30-minute presentations. The first delivered by my colleague, Aileen Toland, my fellow Academy tutor in Scotland Excel, and the second delivered by Richard Brown and Sarah Hort from the Competition and Markets Authority. So our first session to be delivered by Aileen is going to be on raising awareness of serious organised crime and the risks these groups pose to public sector contracts and supply chains. We'll also look at the progress that's being made in Scotland around serious and organised crime groups and focus on current issues and the damage caused by serious and organised crime infiltration. So Aileen, just to give you a little bit of background, Aileen's worked in a variety of public sector roles for more than 25 years, ranging from customer service to procurement. And having worked with several Scottish councils in all aspects of procurement and supply chain management, Aileen joined Scotland Excel in 2021 to manage one of our large frameworks, and has since joined the Scotland Excel Academy and now delivers workshops on all aspects of public procurement, including delivering workshops for the Scottish Government's Procurement and Commercial Training Framework. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Aileen, please. So Aileen, just when you're ready, if you can possibly share your slides, and I will put myself on mute.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm hoping now that you are able to see my slides. Thank you very much to Phil for that lovely introduction. As you said, I'm Aileen. I'm now in Scotland Excel's Academy. Some of you may know me from some of the workshops that I deliver, but my background is public sector. I've worked there most of my life. Said for several councils, but within those councils I've worked in loads of different departments. So did work in customer service, but I've worked in education, I've worked in housing, I've worked in property. So not just one. I've been kind of roundabout within councils. So that's kind of my background. And as I say, latterly it's been in procurement. But what am I here to speak to you about today? So we're obviously talking about serious organised crime and what is happening in public sector through the contracts and supply chain. But little agenda for today. I'm going to go right back to the beginning and talk about what are we talking about when we're talking about serious and organised crime, just in case anybody's kind of unsure of what we're thinking of. Going to have a little look at what is happening in Scotland just now, what progress we're making, we'll call it, what progress is happening and what progress has been made, and what the landscape looks like just now in 2024. Then I'm going to move on, think about procurement, what we're all doing, what is happening in procurement, what are the problems we're finding in procurement, what can be done in procurement, what can we be looking to do as part of our contracts and as part of our tendering to try and kind of, as best we can, stamp out serious organised crime through our contracts and stamp out the public purse being spent on serious and organised crime. So going to have a chat round about what we could do, think about different things to do. A wee bit of new legislation, don't know if everybody knows about it, that should hopefully have an impact on what we're doing, although it's not sort of procurement legislation per se. And then finally, just to let you know that we have a more in-depth training course coming up in about a month's time if you would be interested in joining us. So starting out, what do we mean when we talk about serious and organised crime? So the Criminal Justice and Licensing Scotland Act says that serious and organised crime is a crime involving two or more persons acting together for the principal purpose of committing or conspiring to commit a serious offence or series of offences. What do we mean by serious offence? It's something that is committed with the intention of obtaining a material benefit for a person, and it can be an act of violence or threats, a way of obtaining that material benefit for that person. So that's what we're looking at, serious and organised crime. It's how somebody commits this crime against somebody else. Within Scotland, what do we say serious and organised crime is? What the previous slide said, it involves more than one person. It's something that's organised. So it's something that has taken some planning to be done, and it's got an element of control in it, and potentially it uses specialist resources depending on what type of crime is being caused. It has a cause or has a potential to cause significant harm to people, organisations, in whatever way it does, and it involves some sort of financial benefit to the individuals concerned. That's why folk get involved in serious and organised crime. Mainly in the first place, it's that financial benefit. So we've talked about serious and organised crime. You'll also see throughout the presentation reference to SOCG, serious and organised crime groups. So that's sort of professionals that are involved in businesses. We've put not gangsters. It's not your typical gangsters. It can be sort of the person sitting next to you when you're at a conference or at a meeting, very well to do, the shirt, the tie. Not every criminal sort of looks like a criminal in what we think of criminal looking ways. So just to be aware of that. See, it covers lots of different people in lots of different environments. So when we talk about it, what are we thinking of? What could be involved in serious organised crime? Just some suggestions. It's not, this doesn't cover everything, but it's some suggestions of what serious and organised, so what it looks like, sorry. Bribery, the act of receiving something in exchange for something else, you're getting bribed to do something that you maybe don't want to do. Collusion, is that involved within our contracts? We usually ask for no, or getting to sign no collusion. Is there a conflict of interest? Is that where the crime is involved, where you can have multiple interests and they conflict with each other? Corruption, the abuse of power for gain, which is what these crime groups are looking for. Fraud, is there the deception of carrying out for personal gain or the cause of loss to another party? And lastly, something that can be quite involved in what we're doing, money laundering, ways of organisations to launder their money through what looks like legitimate businesses, and that's what we are trying to sort of look at, those folk that we are dealing with, or suppliers or contractors that we are looking at and looking to give contractors to, that look as if they're legitimate businesses, but maybe in the background there is something more going on with how they operate. So within Scotland, Scotland has its own serious and organised crime strategy, and the Scottish Government's strategic vision is for a safer, fairer, more prosperous country, free from the harm caused by serious and organised crime. Wouldn't that be lovely for us all? That is what I think we would all be looking for. Scotland's had this strategy, the Scottish Government have had this strategy for a number of years. I think they first published it 2009, I want to say, updated 2015, and the last one was updated in 2022. And as I said, the aim of the strategy is to try and reduce serious organised crime in Scotland, look at ways that we can reduce it and the harm that it's causing to us all. What's it doing? It's looking at how we collaborate across Scotland and looking at the ever-changing landscape, because I'll touch on it in slides going forward, but it's always changing. In the same way that procurement is always changing and evolving, so does the crime that gets carried out within it, changes and evolves. Scottish Government, they're looking to work with businesses, regulators, local authorities, public sector organisations, ourselves, this collaborative approach to try and stop serious and organised crime infiltrating our contracts in the wider Scottish landscape. So for those that don't know about it, what is the strategy? What does the strategy contain? It's focused on 4 objectives, and there they are there: divert, deter, detect, disrupt. So they're looking to divert people from becoming involved in serious and organised crime or using the products of serious and organised crime. It's looking to deter it by supporting public, private and third sector organisations in ways that we can protect ourselves and each other, and that's sort of looking at how we could work together to try and protect ourselves. Detect, it's looking at ways of identifying, detecting and being able to prove who's involved in it and being able to prosecute them. And finally, the above strands are all looking at the end of the day to disrupt serious and organised crime groups and try and stop the harm that they can cause within our communities. So what I want to do is have a look at the individual strands and look at what's been happening in the past few years and the good things that we have to report round about the strands. So the divert strands, it has 3 main themes in the strands, and they're looking at individuals and communities, the products of serious and organised crime, and people on the verge of entering into it. So what's been happening with the divert strand? How has that been working out? What they've managed to do is divert some of the money from serious and organised crime into communities, into helping communities and helping them with what's happening within their communities. So since 2008, £110 million has been committed to supporting community initiatives and improving the quality of life for young people. And that's a way of trying to stop young people becoming involved in the first place in serious and organised crime. Also, since 2020, they have helped 153 young people and 32 family members. They've supported them around the impact that serious and organised crime has had on them and their safety and well-being. And that's taken into account communities across Glasgow, Edinburgh and Dundee. So looking at this strand, they have managed to divert money from serious and organised crime groups and bring it out to help the community and try and stop the impact of serious and organised crime in the community. The deter strand, it's looking at businesses, ourselves, public and third sector organisations, thinking about licensing, regulations, enforcement, and how we procure and commission services. So things that they've been doing within the DETER strand, looking at illegal waste disposal and what is happening with waste disposal organisations. And I'm sure we all know that is one of the areas that we should be well aware of within public sector procurement. They've also launched the banking protocol, and they have prevented losses of £29 million since 2018. So really good work that has been going on there. Within the detect strand, it covers things like how they collect, analyse and use information and intelligence to help them investigate the groups with a view to prosecution and trying to stop serious and organised crime. Within this, they've managed to seize quite a quantity of drugs and firearms within Scotland. They've convicted, they've had 45 convictions with sentences up to 115 years. Disrupted just under 200 possible crimes that were going on, and they've seized more than 4 million in cash. And you saw that some of the cash can get diverted into the community. SEPA, it's been investigating waste crime, as I said on the last slide, and they've had more prosecutions under the Criminal Justice and Licensing Scotland Act. So there's a lot of good work going on round about that as well. Finally, the last one, the last strand that we have is disrupt, and it's thinking about multi-agency disruption of serious and organised crime, looking at how people have access to it, looking at finance and logistics. So it's looking at all the data around about it and see how that can be used to try and deter what's going on with this. So they have a lot of prosecutions involved in serious and organised crime, and they have been using the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002 to help them recover this financial benefit from the criminals and divert it into our communities to help sort of stall what's happening in our communities. Just a little kind of recap of what we're thinking and what it looks like for us. At the end of March 2023, there's estimated to be just over 100 serious and organised crime groups in Scotland, made up of just over 1,700 individuals. Now, sometimes you'll look at a report and it'll give you slightly different numbers round about that. But that has reduced significantly since the first report that was out there. So there is a lot of good work happening round about deterring this within Scotland. 61% of the groups are in the west of Scotland. Unfortunately, that's where I am. So hopefully it doesn't impact too much on myself. 23% in the east, 16% in the north. The thoughts behind this is that the west is the most sort of heavily populated area of Scotland, so that is kind of where most of the groups are, but they are spread all around Scotland. 72% look to be seemingly legitimate businesses, and this is where problems for procurement comes in. 72% of the serious and organised crime groups look as if they are running legitimate businesses. Property is the most common sector for these types of groups, but the other businesses that again are part of what we do in procurement or can be part of what we do in procurement are listed here. So things like vehicles and transport, so thinking of our taxi or security contracts, service, retail, food catering, environment, maybe not so much a touch on health and beauty, and social care. At the end of March 2023, there were 105 individuals in prisons around Scotland, estimated to be that, and they're linked to approximately 51 crime groups. So, as I say, we're doing good work, but we need to try and get better at probably what we are doing and how we recognise it. So think about what we do in procurement. What kind of business sectors impact us or could possibly impact us and our contracts? Looking at sort of the property side of things, what do we procure for? Do you procure property development. I think most of us do build properties in some way, shape or form. But other things around about that, like roofing, joinery, scaffolding, demolition, all open to SOC. And I have personally seen that happen in demolition. So just to let you know that it is out there. I have seen that. Other things, vehicle transport, taxis, hire companies, vehicle leasing, couriers, delivery. Do we use all them? Probably more personal to us, health and beauty, hairdressers, barbers, nail bars, tanning salons. I have my concerns around about a nail place that I used to go to, so now don't, because I do feel I shouldn't be encouraging anything like that happening. Service and retail, we do have service contracts. How are they impacted? Sort of business support, or cleaning contracts, recruitment, any kind of service contract you put out there. Is there anything round about that that could have a criminal content to it? Catering and food, thinking of things like wholesale and bakery items. Do you buy that type of thing? Maybe not so much on the licensed premises. I don't know that we maybe run nightclubs and things, but that could be round about licensing. More of our licensing partners would need to look at that. Environmental, big considerations around about environmental, sort of waste disposal, skip hire, recycling, tyres, all that type of thing is quite prevalent within what we do. There's stuff within recreation, security, site security, that type of thing. Do we do anything round about that? And care, it has been grown within care, and I'm going to touch on the next slide that it's been grown within care, but thinking about nurseries, children, social care, care homes, what is happening there. And lastly, I talked about it right at the start, professionals are involved in this as well. So you can have accountants, your IT, insurance, legal. And lastly, I would hope not, but ourselves could be involved in criminal activities in some way. So just to think of some of the sectors that impact us and how we work and what involves how we can be involved. So I touched on saying about care and what I was thinking about care, human trafficking, modern slavery. I'd left this in from the last presentation we did on this because I was actually quite shocked by this. When you look at that map, all the little red dots are places where human trafficking have been identified in Scotland. And it is showing virtually every single area of Scotland. It's certainly covering, I think, every single local authority in Scotland. And you see it, it's even up in the sort of Highlands and Islands, all our islands. It's the fastest growing criminal activity in the world. It's the second most profitable criminal activity behind drugs. And it's getting more prevalent in the UK. And as I said, it has been more prevalent in care services. In the previous 12 months, there have been potential exploitation occurred in care homes that are being investigated. And that's care homes sort of all over Scotland. So places like Edinburgh, Lothian, Falkirk, Glasgow and Ayrshire. And you would think it would be that, like, when you think of human trafficking, modern slavery, you're thinking of like kind of it's foreign folk that would be instigating that, but the folk that are involved in that are actually British people being involved in the human trafficking of people. So for me, a kind of a scary landscape round about that, and something that we should be aware of. So what else do we think about in Scotland? What is happening? So we said at the start, it's about SOC is about generating wealth at the expense of other law-abiding people, including, and they prey on the most vulnerable people in our communities to help them. The cost to the Scottish economy it's estimated to be 2 billion. Think what we could do with 2 billion. Think of all the cuts that we're getting within local authorities. in the wider public sector. What could we do with 2 billion that doesn't need to be used up trying to deter this serious organised crime? It has a disproportionate impact on Scotland's poorer communities. It's they prey on people who are vulnerable and more liable to either help them or fall prey to it. And young people can be at harm or risk of exploitation. They can see it as a way to make easy money and move into that kind of crime aspect of thing. And we're trying to find ways of stopping that type of thing happening. The other side of it, though, is staff within your organisations. Is anybody involved in crime within your organisation? You would hope not, but there are reasons that somebody could decide to link up in a criminal manner. You could be linked to a specific supplier, linked in a family way or friends or that. So when you're purchasing goods or they're looking to purchase goods on behalf of your organisation, are they directing that money to a certain organisation because they have links there? Are they receiving a bribe in exchange for the contract or the money or some other benefit in exchange for what they're doing? Are they being coerced or forced into giving work to a certain supplier? Or have they themselves thought about ways that they could make money through tendering or the pre or post tendering stages? So things to think about. It's not nice to think that a colleague or somebody that works for you is acting in this type of way, but it has been found in some organisations, and it's something that we should be aware of and look out for. What kind of impact does it have for our businesses in Scotland? So legitimate businesses, they lose out. Consumers could opt to purchase counterfeit goods or goods that aren't sort of to the standards that legitimate businesses sell. They can lose business by not winning public contracts or be forced out of business because money is being diverted to these sort of criminal-led businesses. They may be threatened, forced to pay protection. I don't know why that surprises me as well, that type of thing still happens, but yeah. Or they could be forced to adopt underhand tactics just to be able to compete with what's going on criminal-wise and for survival. So what do businesses operated by criminals or the serious organised crime groups have? They can have an unfair advantages over legitimate businesses. They'll have more money because they're funded by criminal proceeds rather than legitimate trading. So the thought is that there's a lot more money about for them to continue their criminal activities. They're quite happy to indulge in unfair competition, price fixing, or sort of large price cuts, selling things in the black market. We've used smuggling cigarettes, that type of thing. They're quite happy to fund their businesses sort of in non-legitimate ways. And they're also happy maybe to ignore legislation and regulations, therefore cutting their cost of operations. And I suppose that's where we're coming in when we're doing our contracts. If there's legislation and regulations, we need to be checking these organisations. So how does it put public services at risk? Talked about that 2 billion that's been spent. The more money spent on tackling what's happening in serious organised crime, there's less money for public services, and that has been recognised. And organised criminals, they seek to legitimise themselves by bidding for our contracts and can say, we're working with this public sector organisation, and it gives them that kind of legitimacy around what they are doing. What are the current issues around what's happening? And this is looking at sort of 2022 onwards. The COVID pandemic, you would have thought that would have stopped criminals. We were in lockdown, we weren't allowed out, but they found different ways of operating and found ways to circumvent lockdowns, and they still managed to work throughout COVID. Think about how we all felt during COVID. So there was an increased vulnerability about us all, so that it was easier to find sort of victims or have victims of their crimes. And post-COVID, they're continually evolving and looking at trying to legitimise their businesses and looking at where they can get involved in vulnerable communities. And I suppose, as I say, that's what we're trying to keep an eye on. Other considerations round about what's happening in with serious and organised crime. Probably more to do with what I was talking about previously, the land borders in Ireland. It's easier to bring people through into Britain through Ireland because there isn't controls there. So thinking about that and what is happening there. The exploitation of procurement, we've talked about that, defending what's going on and the cost of us defending what's going on if we're at all worried about it. So the cost of procurement and us doing our checks and balances and making sure everything's right. Are we working in partnership? Are we sharing information? Could we get better at doing that? Could we get better at sharing information? And that was something I should have said at the start. This is a good forum for any good practice that anybody wants to tell us about. So if there is anything, I'll give you an option at the end to share any good practice or anything that you've seen that you want to highlight to us. It's a good forum here. There's quite a lot of people from a lot of different organisations on to be able to speak about it or just share some information so that we can know what we're looking for when we're doing our contracts. And that leads on to the next one, public sector awareness and resilience. Public sector need to get good across the whole of public sector, not just sort of procurement. What else in your wider organisation? Where else is looking at serious organised crime? Is it purely your procurement departments trying to tackle that themselves? Is your organisation as a wider organisation? Do they have something round about that they promote a lot? We need to be aware of the lifestyle of serious and organised crime and where it can be. And as I said, it's not sort of what we would class as criminal types that you see. It's very well-to-do folk, well presented, well spoken. They can all be involved in serious and organised crime. And last one, biggie, cybercrime. I think cybercrime's growing all the time. It's always about, there's been a couple of big organisations that I know of recently been party to sort of cybercrime. I know my local university got attacked, had a cyber attack. It's been nearly a year since their cyber attack and they're still not back to normal, and they had to go right back to basics. When I spoke to them, they had to go right back to, they said it was like 30 years ago when they had no computers. Everything was done by hand, everything was a bit of paper, everything was letters. That's basically what happened to them and what they had to go back to. So cybercrime is very prominent. What is your organisation doing about that? What is happening round about it? Certainly Scotland Excel, our IT department, they're fabulous, I think, but they're always sending us out test emails. Are you going to take the bait and click on this email and click on the link that could possibly be a cyber link? So we get them out on a regular basis and need to do additional training if we get caught clicking the links that we shouldn't be clicking. So things like that. What is your organisation doing about cybercrime and how they stop it? So what's the potential damage caused if you interact with serious and organised crime? Reputational damage, obviously. Could be damage to your business continuity. How does it affect your contracts that you have in place? How does it affect the supply chain, if there is a supply chain? Remediation, replacement costs if you're buying goods that are maybe not up to standard, or have bought goods that aren't up to standard, what's the cost of replacing it? Could be subject to fines depending on what you've done, or what you have found out. Are you subject to fine? And other things that will cost you, such as investigating what's happened. Does there need to be disciplinary through it? Do you need to look at your processes? Do you need to change them? Do you need to have different policies in place? Do you need to train? Who are you training? Is it a small sector of your organisation? Do you need to train your whole organisation? Everything that you do round about that has a cost. What is the cost to your organisation round about it? So getting to the sort of probably the meaty part of what you're looking at today, where does it occur in procurement? So I've kind of split it into two, just sort of your tendering stage, and then sort of once you've awarded the contracting stage. So what we're thinking of tendering stage, collusion. Is there collusion between the contractors? Are they sort of working together to sort of set pricing, that type of thing? Is there any pre-tender manipulation before you put the documents out, before you get to that stage? What are you being asked to do? Is somebody insisting that you are looking at publishing for a certain type of thing that you want to buy? Are they trying to skew the specification of what you're going to buy? Or going the other way, if it's unregulated contracts, are they trying to get a certain supplier sort of into this unregulated contract? You could be involved in bid manipulation, agreeing pricing, submitting false bids. Again, that's something that ties into what I said previously. I have kind of seen that happen to a certain extent, although I had no actual proof that it was happening, but I have seen what, as an organisation, we decided that was what was happening, type of thing. Is anybody taking any bribes or kickbacks? And are there direct awards that are happening? Now, direct awards are fine if they're in the context of what your standing orders and what your financial regulations are setting out, but are there direct awards that shouldn't have been direct awards that are being put out by your organisation? So think about, once you're under contract, what kind of things should you be looking at? False invoicing. It still surprises me the number of sort of training or organisations that I speak to, and I say, who checks your invoices? How do you know? And they say, oh, anything that comes through, we just pay it. Nobody does that sort of check. And somebody said, yeah, we found out that not every month, but some months we were paying 2 invoices, so they would get 2 invoices in October, maybe November, December, they would just get the single invoice, and then it would go January, a couple of invoices from the same company, but they were just getting paid because they knew they had to pay that company. Invoice looked the right amount, just pay it. Who's checking the invoices? Is there any unexplained increase of spend with a supplier? Has somebody within your organisation, are they being bribed to put more spend through? You know, if there's an unexpected increase in spend, why is that happening? Lack of monitoring and reporting. What does your organisation do around monitoring and reporting contracts once they're up and running? What sort of contract supplier management is your organisation doing? Is there any missing assets in inventory? Who has responsibility for checking stuff like that? And who has the responsibility for making sure that anything's in, has an out, and it's not an out that's not recorded anywhere? And does your organisation have segregation of duties? Do you have separate people doing the ordering, receipting, and then paying? Is there that segregation, so is that one person's not responsible for that and open to being bribed in any way? So we talked about where SOC can come into procurements, and I just thought I'd highlight a couple of Scotland Excel frameworks where we recognised that there was the potential for serious and organised crime in them, and sort of a couple of things that we did just to try and make sure that serious organised crime couldn't get onto our framework. So we've got around about 70 frameworks. We do take serious and organised crime very seriously in all of them. But these are 3 that are a high potential risk of it. So the security framework, we talked about that previously, security. So we worked with Police Scotland and the Security Industry Authority when we were getting the documents together before tender and before putting it out. We asked that everybody was registered on this Security Industry Authority approved contractor scheme. And we asked them to sign a declaration of non-involvement in serious organised crime. Our social care agency framework, which has recently went out to retender, we had 3 declarations in it. So no collusion, declaration of non-involvement in human trafficking and exploitation, as I say, because that is getting bigger within social care. So we asked them to sign that. And again, that non-involvement in serious and organised crime. And then lastly, with our recyclable and residual waste, we put in more specific questions in the tender, talking about bidders declaring any convictions or sanctions or recommendations made in relation to the licences that they have to hold. And with a caveat that at any point, if anything like that happened to them throughout the lifetime of the contract, they do need to let us know of it. And that is over and above the previous declarations. We had them signing those declarations as well. So it's things to think about. Is there anything specific that you can ask as part of the technical side of what you're doing, that around how the organisation's operating? Is there anything that you need to do around about that? But I think as a minimum, it should be this sort of no collusion, no declaration of non-involvement in serious organised crime, and that human trafficking one if it is appropriate. So how do serious and organised crime groups or their companies get into our public sector contracts? We procure, as I said, in the sectors that they operate in: property, vehicle, transport, service, security, care. We procure in all those. We are required to be transparent in what we do. We advertise all our contracts. We advertise who wins our contracts. So sort of crime groups can look and think, oh, they've won a contract. Can we work with that company that's won this public sector contract if they haven't been the ones winning it? We have a requirement to open our contracts to competition, which does leave us open to these types of group bidding for them. There's limitations around what we can do when we're looking to exclude organisations. There are some things we can do, but there's limitations around about it. Organised crime groups, they are interested in our high value contracts. We have a number of, or we can have potentially have a number of high value contracts. Doesn't mean they're not interested in smaller ones, but those big contracts that run over several years, leave them able to operate if they can get onto them. It's a steady, sustainable, secure and legitimate source of income for them. And there's potential that as contracting authorities, we don't look at our contracts, we don't have that good governance in place. And that's why I'm asking you to think about what, not just what procurement departments are doing, but what your organisation as a whole is doing. What kind of governance do you have in place? Where could they possibly be thinking of trying to infiltrate? So regulated contracts, regulated procurements, as I say, they are attractive because they're higher value, longer term, and we are forced to open competition. So they'll look at them and think that that is a good way of getting that steady income to keep their organisation going. Something to consider though, we've got down that unregulated procurements are less attractive because they're lower value. They possibly don't go on for as much of a length of time. But there may be not as many probity checks carried out in these ones. So my question to you is, what happens with your unregulated procurements? Who carries out your unregulated procurements? It will be in your standing orders. How's it done? Does procurement do your quick quotes? Does procurement have sight of your quick quotes? Do we look at them at all? Or is it purely the service departments? Have the service departments been properly changed in SOCG? Do they know about it? They can know about what's in your standing orders. Do they know about all the checks and balances? Do they know about sort of doing market research about who they're inviting on to tender for these unregulated procurements? If it's quick quotes you're carrying out, that type of thing. How much training's been done round about that with them? Is it a consideration for you to try and stop that happening to yourselves? What else can be done? Things like, do you check who associated companies are when you're going to award a contract? So my example's Company Watch. And again, my example come from what I've worked on. So I worked on the care side of things, and it was really interesting. We used Company Watch, and it let us see, although we asked as part of the tender for organisations to tell us their links to other companies, it was interesting to see, even when we were told the links to other companies, knowing who higher up the chain was involved with these companies. So who like the parent company. So you could have 2 or 3 companies, they have a parent company, then another 2 or 3, and there's a higher up parent company. And sometimes it was just having that knowledge, so as we had that knowledge to better contract supplier manage some of these companies. As part of your procurement, ask for the suppliers to give you either a statement or their policy on serious and organised crime as a half one. I spoke about it in the previous slide. Integrate proportionate, sustainability, accessibility, cybersecurity, GDPR, or any other questions within your tender. Ask the bidder to sign up to a supply chain code of conduct. Do you have that within your organisation? Is it something that you could get together and ask people to sign up to? Require approval of subcontractors. I think a lot of us do that now, require approval and get them to complete SPDs as well as the main contractor, and require approval if any subcontractors change throughout the term of the contract. Is there a possible way that you can write something more into your terms and conditions, or more into your ITT around serious and organised crime, and how you will act as an organisation if the supplier is found to be involved in serious and organised crime? I've talked about the certificates. Get your certificates signed, and carry out an annual health check on all your contracts. I put a little bit at the bottom there as a reminder for myself, as well as just to make you aware of it. Part of the Sustainable Procurement Tools has guidance, and one of the guidance parts is security and crime, where it gives a lot of ideas around what you could do within your tender, and it kind of gives you even clauses and KPIs that you could use if you require them. Spoken about it, how confident are you that your organisation is not at risk of purchasing goods from organisations with serious and organised crime, and how have you reached this? Have you carried out a serious and organised crime audit as an organisation? Are your procurement and contract management and due diligence procedures, are they robust, fully implemented and being properly followed? How do you know this? Who's checking this? What checks and balances are done? Are they regularly reviewed, and when did you last review your procurement processes? And do they specifically consider SOCG infiltration and risk? Do you have that on your risk registers? Are you confident in the staff that have purchasing responsibilities? So that's what I was talking about, the wider than just procurement. Does the wider staff know about SOC and how to deal with it? And is there any way that your procurement processes can protect staff from getting involved or have undue pressure put on them to be involved in SOC? Are your records and supplier details maintained, and are they checked and verified sufficiently? So just some things to think about, either as procurement departments or wider organisation. And getting near the end, you'll be pleased to hear, so a little bit of new legislation that maybe has bypassed some folk because it's not 100% procurement related, but it is related to SOC. So I thought I would make you aware of it. The Economic Crime and Transparency Act 2023 came in just in October last year, just at the end of the year. And what it does is it's really to highlight that Companies House, it has given Companies House new and enhanced powers to improve the quality of what is on the data that they hold. So I would hope that we all check Companies House round about any organisations we're going to procure with. It's given them, at the moment, they're looking to remove any invalid registered offices and fraudulently set up companies. And going forward, no company will be allowed to set up a registered office with purely a PO box number. It also lets them do more verification and checks on the people that are managing and setting up these companies. All companies will be required to have a registered email address, and they're required to sign a document confirming that they are set up for a lawful purpose, and that gives just more ways of closing them down if they're found to not be working in a lawful way. And they also have the ability to share, it gives them the ability to share information that they find out with other government departments and agencies that we all sort of use and look through. Just to touch on it as well, the Procurement Act down south, it's brought in, I just read this morning, around contract supplier management and having to publish KPIs for sort of larger contracts, but organisations involved in the larger contracts, and more being more open around what's happening with your larger contracts and how companies are working with them. And it was quite interesting reading round about that. I know that doesn't impact us, but we haven't changed our procurement regulations. Is it a possibility that something like that could be brought into our procurement regulations if decisions are made for us to update ours the way they have down south? And finally, just to say that, as I said at the start, in about a month's time, 17th of April, we're doing a fuller look at deterring serious and organised crime in procurement. If you are interested, you can book it through Eventbrite or contact us at the Academy. But please feel free to contact us if there is anything else you would like to know. So it leaves me just to say thank you for listening to me. I think I might have went on a bit longer than I should have. If you've got any questions, or as I said, have you got any good practice, anything you've seen, anything you would like to share with us, seeing as we're in such a large forum at this point in time? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aileen. So I'd just like to, there have been quite a lot of questions, and we're not going to be able to cover all of them. So I'm going to try and ask a couple of things that might cover a few of them at the same time. And then obviously what we're going to do is we're going to take away all the questions, make sure that we answer them all, and that will accompany the video on the Academy afterwards. But there's one I was scribbling it down there. So it was one of the things that you mentioned in your presentation, and it was about your experience of identifying bid rigging in a tender that you were involved with. Could you explain a little bit more about what was rigged in the bid and how you saw or how you identified this? Because I think that will help explain a few of the questions that are there at the same time, I hope.
Right, so my bid rigging, and I must say we couldn't prove it. So it happened a number of years ago now, so it's not been recent, but a number of years ago now. I was tasked with doing demolitions in my organisation. Now, we didn't know when the demolitions were happening, so we didn't make it into a larger contract type thing. We were handling them as they came around. I used a framework. There were 6 suppliers on the framework, so they were all invited to the mini competition. My first demolition, 2 people bid for it, 2 people returned when I put out the quick quote, and the organisation won. That was fine. Did the next one, put out the quick quote again to the 6 suppliers that were on, and 2 people answered and the second organisation one. Again, still nothing you would think of. Went back, did a third one. Absolutely fine. Put it out to the 6 again, still only the 2 answered, and the first organisation one. And it wasn't, if you can't guess yet what's going to happen, it wasn't until the 4th one. And I put it out, and it was the second organisation. So they were pinging backwards and forwards who won. And when I took it to my manager and then we looked at their bids, the one that would win would be a reasonable bid, and then the next one really high, and they were vice versa. So they were swinging the bids, and I spoke to my manager. He's like that, yeah, they're bid rigging. Whatever's happened to the other 4 that were on the contract, they weren't touching it. It could be that something had happened at that side as well. But yeah, they were swinging it. They'd come to some kind of agreement of how they were working, and you know, who was going to win what bid. Spoke to my manager, and I'm all G'd up. What are we doing about this? What are we doing? There's nothing we can do. We couldn't prove it. We had no evidence round about our suspicions. So that is what I have seen. So yeah. But as I say, it happened quite a few years ago. There's maybe something more we could have put in when we were putting out the quick quotes or something. I'm not sure.
Fantastic, thank you. And then there's a couple of questions in around how realistically, one especially from Maureen saying, how realistically can we identify collusion, pre-tender manipulation by bidders? And I guess, sorry, not to preempt what you're going to answer here, but I guess there's a number of different things that we can do. Quite a lot of them you've mentioned in your presentation. But without going back over your presentation, what are the kind of key things that you would suggest maybe looking at?
Yeah, I think it's what we should all be doing. Good market research about what you are buying. And I know it can be difficult if a supplier's coming to you and saying, this is exactly what I want, pushing back on what they want. I've had somebody come, and we were actually laughing about it the other day. Somebody come and tell me that they needed this specific make and model of shower bot. We were replacing showers. They needed a specific make and model of shower because this is the only make or model of shower that would work. It wouldn't cost extra money and having to retile or whatever it was I was saying. And I said, no, you can't, you know, there's no way we're putting out a tender like that. Look at what's out there in the market. All we need to do is put out the size, the shape of the shower, what power we want it to have, that type of thing. I guess it's thinking of different ways of describing what they're asking for as well. We should all know, you know, you don't use the brand names, but is there a way round about the brand names? There's a whole load of things to try and stop it, but I guess sometimes your service department can try and skew you in a certain way, and it's up to us procurement to have done that check and look at the market and have the information with us to be able to say, well, this is what's out there, this is what we can look at, what have you considered this, and have the questions ready round about what you're being asked to look at.
Well, that's fantastic. So I think what we're going to do there is we're going to pause for our break, if that's okay. I'm very conscious that we haven't answered all the questions, but we will make sure that we get to all of them and provide answer those. But just in the interest of making sure we don't overrun too much today, if we can have a break.
Sorry, Phil, I should have said, I put my very final slides, a wee extra reading in it, some of the places that I've got the information I've got for, and they have links to lots of different things you can look at and suggestions and things, just if anybody's wanting to look any further at anything. It's the very last slide.
Absolutely perfect. So if we can all take a short break there, and if we can recommence at 3:07, that would be fantastic. So see you at 3:07, and we'll get on with the second part of the presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Phil.
So welcome back, everybody. So without further ado, with one eye on the clock, I'd like to introduce the dynamic duo delivering our second and final session today. They are Richard Brown and Sarah Hort. Richard is an assistant director in the cartels enforcement team within the Competition and Markets Authority. He's led investigations in a number of cartel investigations, both civil and criminal cases. Richard has been at the CMA since creation in 2014, having joined one of its precursor agencies, Office of Fair Trading. Richard is by background a criminal barrister who practiced for 10 years in the criminal courts, defending and prosecuting the full range of criminal offences. He then joined the Government Legal Service in 2008, working at the Serious Organised Crime Agency, where he conducted civil recovery proceedings, aiming to seize the proceeds of unlawful conduct. He also worked in the Attorney General's office, advising on the whole wide spectrum of legal issues and litigation directly involving the Attorney General, in particular the potential adverse impact of reporting on high-profile judicial proceedings. And Sarah, not to be outdone, is a principal case officer in the cartels enforcement team at the Competition Markets Authority, based in Edinburgh, so more local for us. She is an Australian qualified solicitor, having begun her career at a large global law firm before moving to the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, where she works as an investigator and then senior investigator in the cartels group. Sarah has in-depth experience of the entire life cycle of a regulatory investigation, including working with immunity leniency applicants, conducting dawn raids, sounds very exciting, witness interviews, and compulsory examinations and complex evidence reviews, as well as preparation for litigation. So action, not just words from Sarah there as well. Fantastic from both of you. Today's kind of second session is going to be on recognising kind of bid rigging in public procurement, with insight into some recent public sector cases and some lessons learned from that. And they're going to discuss actions the CMA is taking to help public procurers, which is absolutely fantastic, including the bid rigging screening tool in development, fascinating stuff, and how to report anti-competitive practices. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Richard and Sarah. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Phil. And thanks for having us here this afternoon. I'm hoping you can see those slides.
We can, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so as Phil mentioned, we are Sarah and Richard. Let me just move to the, I think I'm having an issue sharing the slide. Give me 1 second. Okay, and I'll just pop it back on presenting mode. Can you see that?
Yes, I can see that now. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Brilliant. I can't seem to see it on my Teams. Okay, I think that will work. Brilliant. Okay, so if I just move to the next slide. So thank you for having us this afternoon. Apologies for those technical issues. I'll talk a bit more on this slide about what the CMA does more broadly, but for our purposes today, one of the key things that the CMA is tasked with is protecting consumers and government agencies, particularly their procurement departments, from being ripped off by illegal business cartels, which are in essence anti-competitive arrangements between competing businesses. So our aim today is to help you understand what anti-competitive behaviours in relation to procurement might look like. And by doing this, we hope you will be better placed to spot where suspicious and potentially anti-competitive behaviour might be taking place in the projects you handle. And if you do come across something you may think may be illegal, and I think there's been a few comments in the chat about this, or if you have any suspicions of this kind of conduct, we'll also cover how you can contact us. So as I mentioned, a bit of background about the CMA, who we are and what we do. So the CMA is the UK's primary competition and consumer authority, and we are independent from government. We came into being in 2014, as Phil mentioned earlier, taking over from the OFT and the Competition Commission. We have offices across all of the UK nations, and as Phil mentioned, I'm based in Edinburgh, but we also have staff in Belfast, Cardiff, London, and we have recently expanded to Manchester and Darlington. So in terms of our presence in Scotland, we have around 100 staff in our Edinburgh office, and they represent a wide range of expertise and professions working across the CMA's functions. So as well as cartels, we have other areas such as consumer protection, mergers and markets work, just to name a few. So it's probably worth dealing with a common misconception people might have when we mention the word cartel. And I think to begin with, my mum was a bit concerned that I was sort of on the forefront of the war on drugs, because it often conjures up an association in people's minds with serious organised crime such as drug trafficking in South America, particularly after the release of Narcos on Netflix, I think. But the cartels we're going to talk about today are a different type of crime, and they're often much closer to home than people might think, and involve ordinary businesses, as Aileen mentioned before, not necessarily gangsters, but people that can be sort of very well dressed, present very well, people like you and me. And they conspire together to rig outcomes in their favour. So cartels, simply put, are anti-competitive arrangements or agreements between businesses who should be competing with each other, but instead they are getting together to rig the market in their favour, ripping off their customers, often forcing them to pay higher prices for poorer quality goods and services. They also harm honest businesses, which are working hard to innovate and succeed in challenging economic times. And I think in our experience, we've seen cartels in all sorts of sectors of the economy. We see them a lot in construction, and I would say that that's a similar theme both in my time working at the CMA in the UK and also in Australia. But we also see them in a real range of sectors, including pharmaceuticals, estate agents, financial services, airlines, and even among professional model agencies of all sectors. So cartels, and in particular bid rigging, which we're going to focus on today, are a type of fraud and can sometimes be combined with other forms of criminal activity. For example, where public officials might receive financial or other rewards such as holidays, promise of subsequent employment, or in some construction cases, we have seen free home improvements in return for awarding contracts to a preferred bidder. In this type of case, the corrupt public official can facilitate the operation and stability of a bid rigging cartel. And in bid rigging cases, we also often uncover evidence of dodgy payments, what are known as compensation payments, and sometimes referred to even as drinks money between bidders. This is where a company who submitted a deliberately high bid is compensated by the winning bidder for not seriously competing against them. False invoices are sometimes raised to disguise the real reason for the payment, but sometimes the payment is just paid in cash in the good old brown paper bag. And due to this, we often work closely with other agencies, in particular the Serious Fraud Office, but we also have links with the City of London Police and HMRC. And I would say that in our experience, a lot of the cartels we uncover start as a result of difficult economic circumstances. And therefore, we're quite concerned at the moment, in particular due to the difficulties that have been experienced recently and the continuing difficult economic circumstances, that there's probably a high risk of cartel conduct occurring at the moment. And so bid rigging really is a key risk in public procurement. And in the UK, public procurement, as I'm sure you're all aware, is economically very significant, representing around a third of all UK public expenditure and covers a large range of markets for goods, works and services. And just in the UK alone, we spend about £300 billion a year on public procurement. So a really significant spend and a really significant risk. So if you consider the sums being spent through public procurement, then the potential harm from any bid rigging becomes evident. And it is harm that is felt throughout society by taxpayers and by all of us who use public infrastructure and services and who are denied the benefits of competition. It's therefore really important that we're on high alert to the risk of bid rigging and other cartel conduct. So by way of a brief overview, since its creation in 2014, the CMA has been investing in its capabilities to ensure the effective enforcement of cartels and other anti-competitive practices. And I think we've really started to see the results of that work in the past few years. So in the past few years, we've issued fines of over £136 million against companies involved in cartels. The CMA has the power to fine companies up to 10% of worldwide turnover if they are found to have broken the law by being involved in cartel conduct. We've also taken significant action against individuals. So 28 people have been disqualified from acting as directors for their role in a cartel, and 2 people have even been given criminal convictions. But in addition to being fined, it's also worth noting that businesses can face damages claims by third parties, including by government, who argue that they've been the victims of cartels. And this is really an increasingly significant aspect of cartel enforcement and the risk for participants in cartels. Reputational harm can also be an issue. So, for example, recently one company found to have been involved in a cartel was removed from its trade association. And particularly relevant for public procurement is the risk of debarment, which is currently discretionary, but at least I think, as Aileen mentioned, in the south of the UK, there will be the new Procurement Act, which is due to come into force later this year, and that's really going to tighten that up and make debarment mandatory in certain circumstances. Interestingly, though, despite the dangers, competition law risk remains low on boardroom agendas. We found that 18% of people that we polled said their business had senior level discussions about cartel risk, but at only 18%, that really trails far behind health and safety risk and employment law in terms of other risks for the C-suite. So not only are the consequences serious, the risk of getting caught is also very real. We have strong powers of investigation, which allow us to take action where we have reasonable grounds to suspect cartel activity, and that reasonable ground threshold is fairly low. So we have powers to turn up with a warrant and search company offices unannounced and request information and documents, and these are referred to as dawn raids, although I don't think I've ever been on one that actually started at dawn. We usually start at a much more reasonable hour. We can also search the home addresses of those suspected of involvement in cartel agreements. We can interview people, so we can compel people to come and visit us and we'll interview them. Or we can conduct interviews on a voluntary basis. And we can also compel companies or individuals to give us information or documents that might be relevant to our investigation. And then also under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, also known as RIPA, and the Investigatory Powers Act, we have quite strong powers. So we're able to use a number of investigative techniques under these acts, including surveillance, and this can include following and monitoring suspects and covertly recording conversations and meetings. We can also use covert human intelligence sources to obtain information for us, and we can access communications data to gain evidence. So, for example, we can obtain mobile telephone records of individuals that we suspect to be involved in cartel activity. Our intelligence capabilities mean that around half of our cases are intelligence-led. And in one construction cartel, which Richard will speak more about today, meetings of the cartel were covertly recorded by the CMA, and that was used as evidence of illegal cartel conduct. Okay, so for a bit more information on bid rigging and how it takes place, it really comes in a variety of forms, and they're all designed to manipulate the tender process for the contractor's benefit. It's really important that we recognise these and notice where they might be happening. Some of the most common bid rigging activities, which may occur separately or together, can include bid suppression. So this might be where companies agree not to submit a bid at all, which means that other firms face less competition to win the contract. And this is normally done in exchange for some kind of kickback or payment, or could be done as part of an arrangement where the winning bidder then subcontracts part of the work out to the non-competing firm so that it's a sort of win-win arrangement. We also see bid rotation, where companies agree to take it in turns to submit the most attractive bid on a project, thus ensuring they all have what they consider to be a fair share of the market. We also see cover pricing, which is where companies that don't want to win the contract communicate with their competitors and agree to submit inflated cover bids for the job so that a bid from another company looks like much better value. And then finally, we also see customer or market allocation. So this is where companies might agree to divide up customers or geographic areas between them. These companies will then not bid or will submit only token bids to a customer or in an area not assigned to them, meaning that there isn't really true competition between them. And given that bid rigging can inflate prices by around 20%, the stakes really are quite high, both for companies tendering for contracts and for the organisations putting them out to tender. So I'll now hand over to Richard, who will talk us through some of our recent cases.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hope you can all hear me. Yes, I thought it'd be helpful to really set out and illustrate some of the behaviour Sarah's just been talking about through a couple of cases which we've done, well, one a little bit a long time ago, but one more recently. But I think they're good examples. And the first of them may actually make Aileen's ears prick up a bit as it relates to the construction industry and actually demolition. I should stress that this is a civil case, though. We weren't investigating it criminally. These are established companies, but the behaviour, I think, is interesting. So in March last year, we issued a decision finding that 10 firms engaged in bid rigging, and that was in relation to 19 contracts. And these are large contracts, in total over £150 million, the value of them, and that's in relation to demolition, as I said, but also asbestos removal works. As a result of our findings, 4 directors were disqualified, and the companies in total fined almost £60 million. I should add that these are under appeal by a couple of the companies, but the actual, so that's the fines amount, but the contracts involved themselves were in the southeast of England. They involved the Met Police Training Centre at Hendon, Bow Street Magistrates Court and Police Station, Selfridges site, and offices on the South Bank. But as well as the southeast of England, there were also major contracts in Reading, Oxford, and in Coventry affected by it. So that's the sort of the bold facts of what we came to in our infringement. But there was an additional factor to it, which was we found that a number of the firms were also involved in compensation arrangements. Not all, but a number of them. And by those under those arrangements, designated losers of the contracts, that's the ones who submitted the cover bids, were to be compensated by the winning bidder for what they'd done. The value of the compensation varied, but we did see some very substantial amounts involved, and one of them was over more than £500,000. We also have found, as a result of those compensation payments, that some tender bids were inflated as a result to take account of those compensation payments. Thank you, Sarah. If you can move on to the next slide. So just a bit more flavour to this case. We've had evidence from a number of sources, so text, WhatsApp, emails. They're all very common to our investigations. The evidence on this slide, though, relates to one of the contracts, that relating to the site around Selfridges in the centre of London. I'm just going to let you read through some of this slide. First of all, the text, and then the email. So from that text, I suggest you can see it's a real example of the blatant contact that goes on about a contract. I say blatant, obviously no one else apart from the sender and the receiver is meant to see this, but there's a real discussion about the figures that they're going to be submitting for their respective bids. You've got the phrase there, can you give us a ring in the morning to discuss the numbers? And that was very often what we see. The initial contact about a bid would be around the emails, then around the text. And following on from that, there would then be an email, in this case, the next day. And in that, you've got a company A telling or showing company B what their tender proposal is going to be, and then actually going further and giving specific instructions to the other company about how they should change their own tender for this job. So they're actually saying to them, this is the spread that they should go in, their prices, how they should be changed, but also importantly, how the length of their job should also be changed, proposed jobs. And that's actually, because obviously, as you know better than me, that is also a really important factor when looking at a tender. Thank you, Sarah. This slide really sets out the sort of the other aspect which I mentioned in this particular case, that about compensation payments. The source of the evidence, again, very similar. You've got the text message, first of all, setting it all up. So very similar to the sort of, if I can put it, a simple cover bidding. But it has really blatant nature of what they're trying to say. It talks about £50,000 each, placings to be agreed. And then you've got amounts also. Can I invoice you for one job less than another job. So really taking account of the sort of ongoing relationship and the over resulting figure 40K. So, you know, it's really cynical, really blatant, and they're keeping account of what they're doing in the form of slates. And they need those, and they're often set out in notebook extracts, which we found, and these are exact quotes from them. You've got Reading 65K or 75K, Reading 60, and it's then sets out, you know, who owes what to who. And then finally, on this aspect, we've got an issue which around the actual how those payments are made. And we found evidence that invoices were sent from one company to another, fake invoices or fictitious invoices, in which they're saying they're trying to hide the payments under fictitious services between the two companies. The next example I want to move on to is actually, again, in the construction industry. It's one which is a bit older, but it's a case I was involved in where we issued a decision back in 2018. It doesn't seem that long ago, I must admit, but it was 3 companies who broke competition law. So again, a civil case in the main, but there was actually one criminal conviction arising from it. The particular features of this case were, and Sarah touched on it, that there was CMA secretly recorded cartel meetings, involved a number of participants sitting in, you know, the image is the dark smoke-filled room with business cartels. Actually, in this case, were pretty accurate. It had a number of elements, this cartel. Firstly, they agreed to fix or coordinate their spot market prices. So they'd set up their lists, their agreed sale price lists, and then their sales staff would use those when agreeing prices with customers. Secondly, the parties shared the market. They came to an arrangement how they divide up the market by allocating customers to one or other. And thirdly, they regularly exchanged commercially sensitive information, and that was really for the purposes of the first 2 parts of the agreement as they're set out. In this industry, it's not, I pretty admit, not the most sort of racy of industries. However, if you think it through, it's actually one which affects so many projects, and actually major projects, major engineering and construction firms, utility providers, local, national governments across the whole country. I mean, every morning I used to cycle down to my local railway station, and they were having to be doing the car park, and there were the products involved that I was investigating at the time. So it really brought it home to me how, you know, what may seem like a relatively benign industry product actually is really important in so many spheres of our daily life. Just to give a little bit more colour to this case, moving on to the next slide. Sorry if that's... Thank you very much. So, as I said, we managed to record 4 of the meetings where the company senior executives were meeting in secret away from business premises. They were doing so in hotel meeting rooms. These hotels were often tucked away. The actual rooms they were using didn't have any signs or any way of identifying on them. And you could actually hear what were meant to be competitive rivals discussing these detailed price lists. And, you know, they'd be sitting there talking through, making sure that the price lists were in line with their discussions. And then you could also see them talking about which customers and contracts belong to who and how they were going to maintain the market shares. The fact that this wasn't really any normal business practice was further illustrated by some of how they kept track of those discussions. One individual had a folder in which he'd had written on the front, "Boys Spoils." Another referred to it as the Pigeon Club. So really recognising that this, as I said, was an ordinary business practice. And this quote, I'd suggest, really does indicate the cynicism of what they're doing. They're really, the numbers they're talking about, it's all about their profits. And as I said, one of the individuals involved did receive a criminal conviction. 5 directors were all disqualified, 1 for 12 years. Moving on to the next slide, I'm increasingly conscious of time ticking on, so I'll perhaps sort of not skirt through, but try and condense things down a little bit. So this is all about reducing risk to bid rigging. There are 4, I'd say, general tenets that we'd recommend, and they're set out on this slide, but just very quickly running through them. First of all, just be aware. We've given indicated to some degree what bid rigging might look like, the various ways, the forms it can take. Then look at designing and managing your procurement process so that you can actually reduce that risk. And I'll come on to a few steps that we'd suggest that might help, really overall steps. Then there's the red flags. What is it that sets off those suspicions in your mind about what might be going on? And then how to report, and picking up on some of the comments in the chat, how you can report this suspicious activity to us at the CMA, and then we can use, if we feel appropriate, the tools that Sarah's talked about. And I suggest they are pretty widespread, effective steps to investigate as well. But again, one really important step, and must flag, if you do suspect bid rigging, you should not attempt to speak to the suppliers involved about it, as that might actually result in a tip-off and actually makes our job of investigating and obtaining evidence far harder. So first of all, the red flags, and that's suspicious bid rigging. So this is about the actual information that's provided to you. So this is the sort of thing which, again, listening to the previous presentation made me think, actually, this is what happens. You might see unusually high bids. You might see identical, very similar bids. Some bids don't have the detail you're expecting. Just all bit by bit makes you think, hang on, this doesn't seem right. Or you could see where the scope of the tender is changed. Suddenly, incremental bids go up, but the same way, same amounts. And finally, you don't get the same number of bids as you're expecting, or someone who you really thought should be bidding just fails to enter one. Moving on, please, Sarah. So the next thing is actually more about the individual bidders themselves. How might they behave? So if you get you notice that someone who was successful suddenly subcontracts to a supplier that wasn't actually competing, or somebody who's entered a very low bid, or very strange bid, or one which was clearly not going to be compatible for that tender, then that might raise some suspicions. You might see some suppliers always submitting bids, but they never win, and that's because they're designed never to win. And that might be evidence of a market sharing arrangement where actually in that particular area, your particular area, that bidder, that company has decided, I'm not going to win, but they may be winning in another part of the country. You might actually hear one bidder letting slip some knowledge that things aren't going to go well for them on that particular bid. We've seen it before. So it's really a sort of, as alarm bells just go off in your head. It's almost like writing a word when you're spelling, and you look at it and go, that just doesn't feel right to me. You may feel it's not very much, but we might know a bit more, and it might be part of a bigger picture. There are though one thing which I think is worth drawing your attention to on a sort of bigger picture. And that is actually that there are some factors that in our experience do tend to make cartels more likely. We do see cartels, as Sarah said, in a broad range of industries, but there are some common factors in a large number of them. So that's where there are potentially a relatively small number of firms competing in the industry. They're generally, you might find alternatives, same firms regularly bidding against each other in regular tender exercises. Another factor is where you have a homogeneous product or service, and the main way in which companies compete against each other is actually on price. Finally, there is a common factor is where you have opportunities for competitors in an industry to actually get together, meet together. Are there already ways that they communicate between them? So you could have trade shows, conferences, golf days, I'm afraid, or perhaps where there's a trade association where competitors meet regularly. The trade association themselves may not be involved, but we all know that if you go to a social event, you have people in the same business, at some point there is a risk that they're going to start talking about business. So do those companies, the ones you're regularly dealing with, do they already know each other and know each other well? Well, how about reducing risk? How do we go about it? So I think it is important that you design, sorry, I think you've lost the slides there suddenly. It's important you design and manage your procurement process in a way that reduces the risk of bids being rigged. But I understand that, you know, I'm not the expert on running a procurement process, far from it, but there's a few sort of general points you might want to think about if you're not already doing so. Because it does seem that there are a few procurement designs that can increase the likelihood of bid rigging by just making that collusion more likely. Potentially that may happen where if you've limited the number of eligible bidders, part of a limited process, and that's really totally understandably intended to increase the speed of procurement. Or the number of eligible bidders are restricted through design pre-qualification criteria. The tender process may favour incumbents if it places a lot of emphasis on criteria such as experience or firm size, or actually if you've created, understandably, predictable cycles of procurement, and that's through stable recurring demand. So all those points are things which are completely understandable to have happened, but I think it's important to know that by having them, there is potentially an increased risk of that collusion happening. So we suggest you to really go back, look at best practice. There's the Cabinet Office outsourcing playback, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. We have been working closely with the Cabinet Office to ensure that the risks around bid risk rigging are reflected in that playbook. And also, as touched on before earlier today, do let your suppliers know that you're being vigilant for signs of bid rigging. Tell them that you actively monitor bids, that you report suspicions. You can even include a link to the CMA information in tender documents and it's in your tender documents. And it may sound obvious, but getting signed declarations for non-collusions from parties, that will make it easier for, first of all, ourselves when investigating, but also later on for people bringing damages claims. So that can include public procurers as well. This is just a further tool which we're using to try and detect bid rigging. It's called our own bid rigging screening tool, but we've been working with other international partners and our own data science team and developing this tool to identify potential collusion. We use it to analyse the conduct of companies, and that's looking at their prices, market shares, and their bids for contracts. It's still early days in relation to it, but we have already been able to test it on live tender data, and that's been provided by a public sector procurement organisation. However, the data science team, perhaps inevitably, tell me they can never have enough data. So we are actually looking to work collaboratively with public sector bodies, really wanting to help to increase our development and testing of the tool and really looking for further data. It could also be a useful part, we think, of any organisation's counter-fraud strategy. If it is something you'd be interested in working with us on, then we'd really be happy to discuss it further with you. In terms of the sort of data that we'd be looking for, I'll set this out on the next slide. It's really what you expect. We don't think it's too complex. It'll be stored on our secure data platform, and it really will be managed in line with our data handling and retention policies and all requirements such as GDPR. So it really is looking for, through this tool, what we're looking for are those red flags, those anomalous patterns in bidding activity. Thank you, Sarah. You are just going to comment a bit more about where to find out more. So this, yeah.
Do you want me to? Okay, I can take it. So at the CMA, we have heaps of advice available on our Cheating or Competing campaign webpage. We have e-learning tools. We have quick guides. The site also includes explainer videos on main types of cartels, some case studies, and some sort of specific pages developed for certain types of cartel offences, such as wage fixing, labour market issues. There's also a link on the page regarding leniency. So this is where if a business has broken the law and that business is the first to report wrongdoing to the CMA and cooperates fully with our investigation, they may be able to avoid fines and director disqualification. But then there's also, I know we're running out of time, but we also wanted to cover a little bit about some work we're doing around the sustainability sector. I don't know, Richard, if you wanted to take these slides.
Thank you, Sarah. Again, conscious of the time, I'll be very quick. This was very much just trying to explain what we've been talking about, a bit like the devil and the angel. There are some instances where companies can talk to each other. They can get together and talk things through. And this is one. We have recently been giving out some guidance which sets out key principles along with some practical examples where businesses can get together with other companies on environmental sustainability initiatives. So this guidance follows the environmental sustainability advice the CMA provided to the government back in 2022. And we understand that some businesses want more clarity about what is and what is not legal when working together in relation to these environmental sustainability goals. So this really does build upon the guidance we gave before, but then we also had a consultation process, and within that we've got at section 3, you've got green agreements guidance gives concrete examples of cooperation that can go ahead without any problems, but really this is very different to the stuff we've been talking to you about earlier. And so there is also sections in it which say be careful, you have to look at them, and is there harm to competition as a result of what you're doing? You've got to self-assess, but if there is any uncertainty, we do welcome businesses to come and approach us under our open door policy. As I said, under that open door policy, if things are unclear, you can come in. We can, as a result of that, issue informal guidance on particular initiatives, where we give such informal guidance that will be subject to certain caveats, but the CMA can also give protection from fines. And our separate task force is very happy to speak to anybody about that. To say this is really very different. If you look at what we've been talking about and look at this, suggests there is a real contrast between the two. Thank you, Sarah.
Finally, we just wanted to give a quick plug. If you do want to make contact with us, we've mentioned a couple of times, if you have any suspicions that something's not quite right, it might be that we might have intelligence in a certain sector, and I kind of think of it like a puzzle. We might have half the pieces, but we can only see half the picture. You might have the other half, and together we can make the full puzzle and really see what's going on. So you might be the missing link. And you may think it's just a suspicion, don't think I can prove it, but always worth reaching out, and we'll take those suspicions and your queries seriously. So those are our contact details. And finally, we did have an any questions slide, but I'm not sure how we're going for time.
I think if people are willing to stay with us, I think we could give those brave souls a few opportunities to ask some questions. So, not to take up too much time here, just looking at some of these questions. There's a good one from Martin Elson, kind of partially a point as well as a question. Can we therefore assume bid rigging is more likely if contractors know who they are regularly bidding against? And I guess just if I can expand on what you were saying there, where we have more transparency in public procurement, where people know who they're on a framework with, where people know the players in the market, that there's all that transparency about who's been awarded a contract, who was involved in the bidding and that kind of stuff. So I guess the answer is probably yes. But do you guys have any thoughts on that element of it?
My immediate thought, if you don't mind, Sarah, is it's not just about the knowing, it's about the contact. I mean, because you can know who else you're up against, but not actually have much contact with them or reason to contact with them. But if you think there is likely to be, highly likely to be a lot of contact, then that's just something that, I'm not saying it means there is bid rigging going on, there is any of this activity, but it's just one of those things to keep on your radar, I'd say.
Absolutely. And another one from Keith. Do you know the reason it's so prevalent in specific fields, for instance, construction? Is that because it's high value contracts in a lot of cases?
Again, sorry, I don't necessarily think it's the high value as such. We've seen examples of it happening in relatively low value contracts and stuff. But again, it may go back to sort of the basics of some of these, and even local areas. They are having opportunities to contact each other, to be in contact with each other a great deal. But also with some industries, I think it was just very prevalent. It was almost seen as common practice 20 years ago or so, 30 years ago, that there was, cover bidding, for instance, and it's just taking time for education to take place and for people to really understand that what they're doing is against the law. And there are some, I think, then you go back, it becomes a circular thing, because there is that contact, there is that lack of education. It sort of goes around. Sarah, I don't know, you've had a lot of cases like this as well. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, so we had a criminal waste cartel in Australia that actually just got sentenced quite recently. And we found that so there were basically two key players in the cartel, one of whom was quite a large listed business in Australia, and one of whom was much smaller. And what we found was actually years and years and years ago, that much smaller business had grown and grown over the years, but had started out as actually like one man with a garbage truck, basically, working as a subcontractor for that bigger business. And so they had that relationship built up over years and years and years. But obviously the business environment changed quite markedly to the point where they didn't have a subcontracting relationship. In fact, they were competitors, but they were still having these regular coffees and meetings and sort of social catch-ups. And so, the relationship kind of changed into something that was no longer legitimate.
Yeah, and I suppose just occurring to me when you're saying that there, the nature of a lot of bids in construction, quite often they're collaborative joint venture consortia type bids. So I guess that continual forcing together for economic reasons, for reasons of economic scale, makes it, I suppose, even more fertile ground for naughtiness, I guess. So, that's an interesting thing to think about and try and think through why. An interesting one has come in asking, do you guys investigate charities as well as companies registered in Companies House, and somebody's also saying here also kind of third sector. I guess you guys go where there's any naughtiness, but
yes, I think that's the bottom line. If we have suspicions that there's bid rigging going on, then we will look at it. In terms of it's slightly very technical here about looking at the status, what is a company and what's called a business undertaking. But the reality is, if someone's engaged in economic activity and they're bid rigging, then we'll be looking at it very closely.
No, fantastic. So I think I'll bring the questions to a close there. Just like to say a couple of things, just to say, first of all, thank you very, very much, Sarah. Thank you very, very much, Richard. And thank you, Aileen. And thank you, everybody who's taken the time out of their day to be with us today. Just to reiterate a couple of things that we've gone over. So Aileen, presentation was great, provided a number of fascinating and worrying statistics in her presentation. I was kind of horrified. I hadn't seen the slide recently about where all the kind of modern slavery, and I was like, oh, right, that was a kind of a particularly horrifying one. Talking about the bribery, collusion, conflicts of interest, corruption, money laundering, fraud, all of these different forms of criminality. And when you're mentioning fraud, I remember there was a National Audit Office report a couple of years ago, which basically said that 4.7% of all public sector spending it goes on fraud on average. And I just looked up what the spend in public sector procurement was last year in the UK, 393 billion. So that's £18.5 billion last year on fraud. Just to put another kind of fun figure to that. As Aileen mentioned, if you'd like a more in-depth run-through of the serious and organised crime topic, please don't hesitate to contact us at academy@scotlandexcel.org.uk. We'll give you information on that. And then we had Richard and Sarah's presentation helped us by explaining a lot of really great detailed examples, bringing it really to life, how to spot that kind of fraud and cartel activity. Some amazing kind of results that they've had with £136 million of fines that they've levied against companies. all the directors' qualifications, the criminal convictions, etc. And also pragmatically great suggestions as to what steps we can all take, including what red flags to look out for, how to reduce risk, thinking about using their bid rigging screening tool. And I love that they finished on a positive with thinking about joint working, especially in green issues, to say there are good reasons for companies to work together. And I should say that explicitly in public sector regulations, it is explicitly enshrined in there that they are permitted to bid jointly, as long as they do that in a legitimate kind of way, which isn't designed to distort competition. And I guess the thing that I'd like to kind of, the thought I'd like to finish off on, wouldn't it be great if all this energy and inventiveness and innovation into this naughtiness was put into something good, because there's clearly a lot of energy and thought goes into this. So yeah, I hope that you're all, and I'm sure you're all better informed following today's session. Thank you again very much for all your time. Thank you to all our contributors and everybody that made this happen. And tell everybody that hasn't been able to make this, your colleagues, you'll be able to get a copy of this on the Academy. And as we said earlier, we're going to be going through all the questions with a fine-tooth comb, providing answers to those, and we'll provide a document alongside the presentation as well. So thank you to everybody involved today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay.
Bye.
See you all later.